against bullying.
We put it out there, just took off. 3 million people have shared this post. Don't let bullies get you down. I stand with you. The whole family's wearing glasses. I wear glasses and I'm proud.
I even have the army on my team.
All the kind comments brought my child joy. I don't feel thank you is enough.
Thanks.
I can do this.
We believe in you.
Each day brings hope.
Every day, millions of people celebrate their recovery from addiction and mental illness while others begin their journey. Be a part of it. Tell your story. Join the Voices for Recovery. Together, we are stronger. For 24-hour free and confidential information and treatment referral for mental or substance use disorders for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP.
If I could go back and change it all, I would. I think I'm gonna miss you the most. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Maybe it's just the little moments. If I could go back and change it all, if I could go back, I would. But I can't.
Welcome to the Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee meeting of Denver City Council. Full coverage of this session of the Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee begins now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning on Tuesday, January 31st at the Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee. We have 3 action items before us today, and we will start with John Stewart from Dottie. John, before you get started, will you just please introduce yourself for the record once you get to the podium?
Pardon me, could you say that again?
Before you get started, will you just introduce yourself for the record?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm all like proper. Let's get going to business.
Do we have more to do first?
Yeah, let's do introductions of my colleagues. Everyone just get started. It's too cold in here this morning. Get in and get out. So let's start with people on on Zoom first.
Lisa Tabaka, District 9.
Get out of here.
Good morning, Stacy Gilmore, District 11.
Go ahead if you're on Zoom and introduce yourself.
Stacy Gilmore, District 11. Hi, Stacy Gilmore, District 11.
If we're having issues with Zoom, are we having some issues with Zoom? I could formally introduce them and then just, yeah. So I believe we have Councilman Tabaka on Zoom and Councilwoman Gilmore today with us. So I think we have a new producer, so sometimes we have a hard time going back and forth. And then let's start with my left for my colleagues who called me out here this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Paul Cashman, South Denver, District 6.
Good morning, Kendra Black, District 4. And Jamie Torres, District 3.
Joel Clark, District 7.
Good morning, Amanda Sawyer, District 5.
And Councilman Herndon just joined us on Zoom as well. So now we can get started with our presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Committee Chair. And good morning, LUTI Committee. My name is Jonathan Stewart. I'm the director of the Colfax BRT project. And I'm here to give an update to the project and request your approval for a resolution that's before you today. So today, I'll give a brief recap of items that we discussed in November, which included approvals of 3 resolutions. And then I'll go over the current status of the project. After that, I'll introduce today's LUTI action that's before you today. And then I'll go into a little more detail and discuss the owner's representative on-call contract. And that's the resolution that's before you today, but I'll just go into a little more detail. And after that, we'll talk about next steps and items that'll be, that I'd like this committee to consider that we'll go over soon in the future, items for your consideration. So just a brief recap, the slide before you right now shows the layout of the Colfax Bus Rapid Transit Project. It starts on the west in Denver Union Station. The bus runs its side running on the streets in this section between Broadway and Union Station. And then in the blue area between basically Pennsylvania and Yosemite is where there's a center running dedicated BRT lanes for the project. And then over on the right, on the east side, the orange area before you, from Yosemite to about I-225, the bus line then goes back to side running, and this is the portion that's within Aurora. So what did we go over in November? I think the main thing that we discussed at that time was a contract amendment for design services. And this was the project acceleration opportunity that I had discussed previously. And that was by approving that contract, that was able to get us from revenue operations for the BRT from 2028 to basically the end of the year in 2026. So it could be up to an 18-month acceleration opportunity. And I want to thank the LUTI Committee and Council for approving that. Also, there was a IGA with RTD, and that basically set us up to receive funding in the future from the Federal Transit Administration. And finally, we had an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Aurora, and that was set up to receive funding for Aurora's portion of the design of the project. And all 3 of those were unanimously approved, and I just thank you very much for those approvals. So where are we currently? So we have finished preliminary design. That concluded more or less in September, the preliminary design process. And currently right now we're going through a NEPA environmental process to get environmental approvals from the federal government, because we anticipate this being a federally funded project. So that process is ongoing right now. We expect it to conclude later this spring, April or May timeframe. And also final design is underway thanks to the contract amendment approval that was approved here in November. And we had a kickoff meeting with the design team just a few weeks ago, and so that process has started. And we expect to have another milestone occur in, I think it's going to be in June when the next milestone we have, and that won't be the conclusion of design, but that's kind of the next phase of design. We're looking for a milestone then. And then today we have the owner's representative on-call city council action. And so that's why we're here today. That's why we're here now. We have an on-call contract with Tri-Unity Incorporated that's before you. And this resolution or this ordinance request is to request approval of an on-call contract with Tri-Unity Incorporated to provide owner's representative professional services for the East Colfax Bus Rapid Transit Project. What is the owner's representative on-call contract? That's a great question. Why are we doing an on-call contract? Well, the main reason that we're doing it is it allows us to bring in the proper resources at the right time, depending on where we are within the project life cycle. It allows us to adapt and right-size the team based on field conditions and market conditions. There'll be certain parts of the project where we need subject matter experts that we don't necessarily have employed at the city that we'll need to call upon. We'll be able to pull those up with a task order, and then when we're done using them for that phase of the project, they can go back to Tri-Unity, and when we begin another phase, we're able to call up those subject matter experts and resources for that portion of the project. It was a competitively procured and federal compliant contract, and that's really important because we expect this to be a federally funded project, and so this contract complies with that. It's eligible to be federally funded. It's a term for 5 years, and there's a variety of different items that are included within the scope of the on-call contract. They include program management, pre-construction support. That's a kind of another way of saying design, more or less. It's everything that kind of happens the planning phase of the project. Communications and reporting, independent cost estimating, and construction oversight. Now, each of these has a lot of subtasks that could be included within the contract. For example, with program management, we'll maintain a program management. Whoops, I wonder what happened here. I'm not sure what I did.
Go to view?
Yeah, okay, I'll just go ahead.
Luke will help.
Okay.
Luke will help you. Just 1 second.
Okay, can you help me out? Full screen, thank you so much. Okay, with program management, it's to establish and maintain dashboards and monitoring so that the owner's representative for us can track the budget, the schedule, the cash flow, and also monitor risk and make sure that we're meeting our DBE requirements. There's a lot of things that go into this, and also helping to manage federal funds, because that requires a certain amount of oversight as well. As far as pre-construction support, it would be to coordinate activities in the planning process and the design process between all the different stakeholders that we have for this project. And keep in mind, we have the City of Aurora, we have RTD, we have CDOT, and also we have Dottie and the City of Denver we have all these different stakeholders that we have to keep happy and also manage and make sure that we're meeting all their standards for this project. I think another one that's really important is the independent cost estimating. And this is basically, we're double checking the designer, their cost estimate, because we need to have a lot of cost certainty with this project. This is a very expensive project, and it's really important for us to have some cost certainty around that. And so we're getting the owner's representative to help us with that, to double check the designer's work, to make sure everybody agrees that the cost is accurate. And then when the project is under construction, we have them set up to provide construction, oversight, inspection, and testing for the project during the construction phase of the project too. And that would be a very big lift for the city to be able to do, because we just don't have the staff available when a project like this starts up. It's just all of a sudden, it requires a large amount of staff in a short amount of time. So that's what's in the contract. And then I'd like to get our Director of Special Projects, Travis Bogan, up here to discuss schedule and upcoming milestones on the project. Travis.
Hello, Ludi Committee and everyone else. My name is Travis Bogan, Director of Special Projects with Dottie. It's a pleasure to be here. I just want to take a few minutes to talk about the overall implementation schedule that we've developed for the Colfax Bus Rapid Transit project. This schedule, as John mentioned before, is in response to a lot of community feedback and opportunities to accelerate the operation of this service by the end of 2026, and that's what we're showing here. There's quite a bit of information on this top part of the graphic. I'm going to walk you through it. The light blue line is the NEPA and preliminary design work that we've been focusing on, progressing and developing the scope and the locally preferred alternative, and getting our NEPA environmental clearance that we anticipate this spring. The green line is our funding identification and development. And we are pursuing an FTA, Federal Transit Administration, Small Starts Capital Investment Grant. And the maximum grant amount that we could pursue is up to $150 million. That does require local match, and we're working on that grant process. It's actually a multi-year process. 2 years ago, we submitted our request to enter project development. That was kind of the beginning of the process. Last year, that green bullet you see in Q3 2022 was our grant rating application that basically allowed the government to rate our competitiveness. A key milestone is coming up this August. That's the green dot in Q3 2023, where we submit our construction grant application. And in order to do that, we need to have confidence in the development of our final design and some cost certainty. And what that really means is we need a good 60% design that we can base cost estimates from, both from the contractor cost estimate and our independent cost estimating firm. The last green dot under Q1 2024 is when we expect to hear about the award of the grant. There's a darker blue line below the green line that represents our final design progression. And so we appreciate the committee and council action in November to allow us to move forward and authorize that final design work. You see a couple yellow dots here that represent approximately 60%, 90%, 100% design milestones where we'll be getting additional pricing. The red line below that is our owner's representative services. These are the services and the variety of scope that John was talking about. And those services will last the duration of the project, and it'll be focused on the pre-construction phase over the next year as we finalize our design and get our cost estimating aligned and look for opportunities to streamline and improve constructability and reduce impacts to the public. So those services are really going to be critical throughout the life of this project, and that's why we're here today. So thank you for entertaining the request for that contract. A couple other things. There is an upcoming procurement. We want to show you the whole implementation plan. There are subsequent council actions that we will be coming forward with. The gray line represents our construction manager, general contractor procurement. And what we're doing is we're looking to hire a construction team. That procurement will be advertised this quarter, and we'll ask them to provide these pre-construction services where they provide input on the design development, and they do constructability reviews and help help us with real-time decision-making based on cost and availability and market factors. So we'll be back in front of council requesting that action. The yellow line, you see construction starting in 2024 through essentially 2026, early 27, with a goal of having operational service by the end of 26. There's a little bit of closeout activities at the end where the final completion is expected early 2027. So upcoming milestones beyond what we're here today. We're here today to request approval of our owner's rep on-call contract to provide these resources to help us deliver this really important pre-construction services phase to set up the construction for success. We'll be back, we hope, around April of this year for some actions on the CMGC, the Construction Manager General Contractor pre-construction contract. We'll also have CDOT funding IGA. We're awarded some funds through DRCOG and CDOT TIP funds that we're going to be bringing IGA to council to receive those funds. And then, as John mentioned, we've been working on Aurora Design IGA that you actually approved in November, and an RTD IGA that talks about our responsibilities as a subrecipient. We are going to amend those IGAs for construction for Aurora, and then for operation and maintenance considerations and agreement with RTD. So that's kind of the big picture of what's coming over the next year or so. Of course, after we get this initial construction manager general contractor action, there will be a subsequent construction contract likely in 2024 that we'll be bringing to you. But with that, hopefully we've provided some good information so you can make an informed decision on this owner's rep contract, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Thank you all. We have two people in the queue. First up, we have Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, you guys. Appreciate you being here and explaining what an owner's representative contract is a little more clearly. So how much have we budgeted for the BRT project at this point?
So we have, I mentioned we submitted the FTA Small Starts Capital Investment Grant application. And with that, we developed a preliminary cost estimate for the project based on the preliminary design. And that cost estimate was $255 million. That is not a final budget. As we go into the final design, we're going to work through what the budget is for the project. But based on the current information and the level of design we have a $255 million cost estimate.
Okay, but does that cost estimate include design and build?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a $25 million, little less than $25 million contract already on the books with Parsons for the design of it. And then we've got another $18 million here for I'm not exactly sure what. And then a bunch of different things, oversight and risk transfer as far as I can tell. And then we are putting out a RFP right now for the general contractor that will actually build the contract.
Yes.
So I know because it's out for RFP, certainly I can't ask, how much you would expect something like that to be, but I can do the math based on a $255 million estimated budget. It seems like that's not a realistic number if you look at what we've already spent.
We are part of the implementation strategy of hiring an owner's rep that has the ability to do independent cost estimating. And this is really, when we talk about cost estimating, we could talk about two types. We could talk about bottoms-up estimating, where you look at what's required to do the elements of the work and productivity in the field and equipment and labor rates and local market conditions and availability. That's a very robust estimate. That's the type of estimate we're getting with the owner's rep. There's also top-down estimating, which we do a lot of. Consider engineers estimating or parametric estimating, where we say, hey, it's so many dollars per linear foot. What we want is the bottoms-up estimating. So as we continue to further the design development and make design decisions on the scope that's included or excluded, we'll be able to make those decisions with the information of our independent cost estimator and a construction manager to tell us the values so that we can continue to design within reasonable cost.
Okay. So then I guess my question is really more about duplication of services, because why would we have an $18 million professional services contract for oversight when they're not our general contractor? Right? I mean, why don't we have why are we not setting this up like we do at the airport, where there is a general contractor and that general contractor is running the project? We have added a layer of bureaucracy and cost here, and I don't understand why.
This is a relatively typical structure of delivery for construction manager, general contractor contracts, where the owner like us, if we had additional staff, we could provide the services that we're requesting for owner's rep. But this is in part staff augmentation because of really our constrained workforce, and it allows us to really cost effectively bring in additional resources and the subject matter experts at the time needed. So we do have a contract with Parsons for the engineering, and we are going to hire a construction manager, general contractor. We'll propose that to council for the construction. Owner's rep services and independent cost estimating are very critical to successfully bring all these groups together, to communicate effectively, to develop baseline expectations of how the contractor builds their cost model and the assumptions they make versus the independent cost estimator, what different requirements, basically holding the contractor to the different requirements. These are skills and scopes that we could deliver with more staff, but we don't have that staff, and so we're leveraging these owner representatives on call as essentially an augmentation and those additional subject matter experts.
Okay. Does the contract contain clear, specific milestones and dates?
The contract is pretty detailed scope menu.
That's not a yes or a no.
Well,
Are there specific milestones and dates in the contract?
As we issue task orders, there will be, yes.
So there aren't in the contract. They're based on task orders.
The work will be authorized by a task order.
So there are not specific milestones and dates in the contract.
Part of what we're working through in the pre-construction
Please
phase.
don't handle me. If there aren't, just say no. That's okay. But answer the question, please.
There's a term in the contract. So it would be 5 years from notice to proceed. So there's an end date.
So there's an end date, and that's it.
And an implementation schedule that we plan to deliver to.
Okay. So my concern, I get why you're doing this. I get we do not have enough staff to do it. I get that it is a huge job, and I get that it's a transformative project in the city of Denver, and I am actually very supportive of it. Although it drives me crazy that there's not enough consideration of what's going to happen to the neighborhoods surrounding it. But we can talk about that later. I get it. My concern is I don't want us to end up in a position like we did with the Great Hall, where we have handed over to someone else all of the decision making and all of the major specifics that come with a project like this without any clear deliverables, timelines, or any more information. Because I don't want another Great Hall project debacle. And the airport did an amazing job of recovering after what happened with Ferrovial. And that is specific to the way they rewrote their contracts and restarted the project in the fall of 2019. So I'm concerned that the same thing is going to happen here because there are no guardrails here, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think a big reason why we're using the construction manager, general contractor form of delivery is to have that kind of control because of lessons learned from the airport experience. Now, that was what they call a design build contract. And with the design build contract, the contractor is in control of everything. And they're in charge of doing their own oversight over themselves. And so we thought that this would be a good delivery method because, first of all, it allows us to control cost. And that's a big reason why we're using the on-call contract, because we don't necessarily have to spend all that money, right? If we end up scaling things back, we can scale it and have it right-sized for what is appropriate for this project. But anyway, back to the CMGC, the construction manager general contractor, we have a lot more control over the contractor with this kind of delivery method. And that way it actually puts guardrails on it, unlike what occurred with the airport, because that was a design build contract.
Okay, so I guess what I am identifying is that what was done with the initial contract in the airport was one single design build contract. What we are looking at here with the BRT is 3 separate contracts: design, bureaucracy, and build contracts. So if the RFP is out, obviously the contract has not been written yet for the construction general contractor. It is concerning to approve this contract with very few guardrails in it for $18 million when we don't see that construction contract. So there are no guarantees for us, and it's our responsibility to ensure that the tax dollars our residents are paying are being used appropriately. So without seeing that construction contract and knowing that there are clear deliverables, dates, and milestones that must be met in that contract, I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of approving $17 million in an on-call contract for you to, not you personally, for Dottie to move this project forward. Do you understand what I'm saying? So what assurances can you give us that this contract and the next contract for the general that comes through are going to have the clear, I'm going to call them guardrails in place to ensure that we're not getting taken for a ride again?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question and the comments. I completely understand. A couple things. We want to make sure we are keeping you informed of the progress, and as with a lot of special projects, absolutely would like to offer quarterly briefing documents with briefings. We are following industry standards when it comes to CMGC delivery and FTA procurement guidelines and best practices. Also building a well-matrixed, robust team with Dottie and Department of Finance and RTD and other stakeholder involvement, City of Aurora as well, to help oversee this. And we follow our governance structure, which includes an executive oversight committee that also helps to stay informed of where we're at with the project and big decision making. So this will be administered similar to how we've done other special projects for the city recently. And we will provide as much information and transparency as you would like to see.
Okay, I really appreciate that. You mentioned the Executive Oversight Committee. Is there a council member who sits on that committee?
There is not.
Why?
I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Next up, we have President Torres.
Thank you so much. A couple questions. In the scope of work, there's information about communications and reporting. Who is the communications with? Is it just to Dottie, or is it community communications?
The intent, and I'll have John elaborate, but the intent is we want to effectively communicate and inform stakeholders and partners. And so this could include bids and RNOs and
Okay.
council and the community, as well as helping with our EOC material development and our overall project delivery.
Yeah, I would also just like to add that we still have a lot of the design to get through, and we want to work with the community to make sure that it aligns with their expectations. Like, for example, what the bus stops look like. There's a long public process that we've gone through to get where we are, but we still have a long way to go, and we want to engage with the public and figure out what the citizens of the city want the design to look like. And so they're our owner's representative. They're going to help us do that with their communications effort to help coordinate that.
Is there already built-in assumptions around language access and interpretation?
Can you repeat the question again, please?
Sure. Are there already built-in assumptions on the part of the owner's rep around language access and interpretation? I guess some of the context is you're going to be covering some territory of some of Denver's most diverse non-English speakers. So just wondering if it's already built in that they're going to need to interpret a lot of material.
Yeah, I mean,
seems like someone's coming up.
Would you like to respond to that?
David Kretzinger, Transit Director for
Will you
Dottie.
can you introduce yourself one more time? We couldn't hear you.
David Kretzinger, Transit Director for Dottie with the city. Thank you, Councilwoman Torres, for your question. Yes, we have both the city language access standards as well as the Federal Transit Administration limited English proficiency standards to make sure that we outreach to all community members regardless of their language abilities.
Magic words. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just wanted to make sure I'm understanding also just the funding that's been set aside for this. So in Elevate, 55 million was approved for BRT. Another 20 million for pedestrian improvements. Was that just for this corridor of East Colfax, or was that the part that was approved for a whole Colfax
It was
run?
for all of Colfax.
Okay, so
we're-
it's a portion of that.
Yeah, we're using a portion, but not
Okay.
all of it.
Okay, great. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Sawyer, do you have another one?
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Council President Torres's question reminded me of another question I wanted to ask you regarding the 20 million for pedestrian and streetscape improvements that was separate from the 55 million. The bids along the East Colfax corridor were required to come up with plans, design them, price them out, and include those. That's how the $20 million came to be. That's where that pricing estimate came from. I have heard several times Dottie representatives working on the BRT talk about the $75 million for the BRT, and I would like to just clarify. It's not 75 million in bond money. It's 55 million in bond money and 20 million for those bids all the way along the Colfax corridor, east and west, to do those pedestrian improvements. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, that is.
Okay.
That $20 million will be spent on pedestrian and safety and corridor improvements along Colfax.
Well, wait, will it be spent on pedestrian and safety improvements along Colfax, or will it be spent on the designs that the bids were required to provide in order to be on the Elevate Denver bond list in 2017?
Precisely, yeah. As you say it, it's going to be included. I mean, it has to be spent on the bids specifically, so it will be. I mean, it is required of us.
Okay. Is it required that the plans that they were required to provide in order to get on the ballot, will you be following those, or will you be taking that 20 million and doing something else with it as long as it's within those bid locations?
What we are going to be doing is completely in alignment with those proposed plans that the bid provided us, and we've given it to our designers.
Okay. Have you connected with the bids to have a conversation about that and go through those specifics?
Yes, absolutely. This week, actually, we did.
Okay, great. The Department of Finance had agreed in August of last year to take some DOTI leftover budget from 2022 and dedicate it to the bids, specifically because the BRT project is taking so long to build out, and those bids had plans for the $20 million that they're not allowed to access until the BRT project is in construction. Do you know whether the Department of Finance provided that funding to those bids?
The Department of Finance and DOTI discussions are still underway as we rolled from 22 to 23.
But that was August of 22 that money was promised.
Yes, that was during the middle of the budget process, so those dollars were not immediately available and are still under discussion.
But they were 2022 dollars.
They were...
It's 2023.
Understood, yes. The dollars were rolled as part of the overall 2023 budget presented to the city.
But they weren't supposed to be, because they were promised to the bids in August of 2022.
That's, I think, for further discussion, we can follow up with you on that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So I have one question. In your presentation, you talked about how this could possibly have federal dollars applied to it. Can you, that's a really broad statement. This $18 million contract could possibly have federal dollars applied to it. Break that down for me. What does that look like? Are we going to actually apply for grants? Would it replace our general fund dollars? Take that huge, broad statement and put it down into reality for people who are viewing this.
Sure. Okay. Well, so we've been in a process to receive federal funding from the Federal Transit Administration for a couple of years now. Right now, the committed funds that we don't have any of that money yet. So we have the next step of the process occurs in this August of 2023, and that's where we apply for, we do a construction grant application, and that's kind of the final step in the application process. And so after we go through that, then we find out what kind of award we can expect from FTA. So right now, we think that we're feeling very confident that we're in a good position to get a large amount of funding from FTA, up to $150 million. But we need to be prepared in case there is some amount less than that. And so I guess that's why I was using the language that I was using. We fully expect to get that money, but we do not have it in our hands today at this moment.
And
because
so
we have to go through.
Would it supplement this contract, or would be in addition to this contract?
No, this contract accounts for that, and that's the main reason why we want to use an on-call contract, because we could scale it up or choose not to if the funds that we receive from FTA ends up being something less than $150 million.
Okay. So I hear lots of concerns from my colleague, Councilwoman Sawyer. So can you commit to coming back next quarter, even though we will have approved this contract, on-call contracts, once they're done, oftentimes we don't see them. And then we'll want to make sure you come back the quarter after that, because we have a change in administration. We have lots of things happening throughout Denver. I will say I've never been a council person while we've had a huge change in administration. So I think that a lot of these concerns that you'll see on the legislative side are we're approving the dollars, but we want to make sure that they're being implemented and that there's not changes. So we have our Luke, our staffer, so he'll just reach out to you, and we'll just make sure that we continue to have quarterly briefings. And maybe the next briefing we can bring the Department of Finance to talk about these monies, because hopefully by then the 2022 books will be closed out, and those funds will actually, the monies that Councilman Sawyer was talking about, will actually have been allocated, and we'll know where they live, and we'll know, and I have a bigger, robust understanding of this project, because it has been talked about for so long. It's such a complicated stack of money between bond, between federal, between DOTI, between who knows. I mean, I'm not even going to be a subject matter expert on that. But let's just come back and circle back around in next quarter and we can have another conversation. Seeing no other questions from my colleagues, do we have a motion? Oh, yep, we have a motion by Councilman Black to move it forward. We have a second by Councilman Cashman. Seeing no other concerns, does anyone have a concern moving this forward? Seeing none, we'll see you at City Council. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a presentation by Community Planning and Development. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Brandon Shaver, Senior City Planner with Community Planning and Development, presenting a map amendment application at 2030 and 2032 Blake Street. As a quick background, this property is rather unique as it is currently vacant, and the Rockies purchased it from Xcel Energy in 2016 with a 20-year no-build restriction and an easement to allow access to the future Barker substation. The substation building is located along Market Street, and some utility uses are present. The requested PUD follows these restrictions and allows an additional use with a variety of limitations, public space and event requirements, and enhanced design standards. As you can see, the subject property is located in Council District 9 within the 5 Points neighborhood. Zooming in a little bit closer, it is at the southeast corner of 21st and Blake Streets. The current zoning, PUD 329, I'll cover in the next slide, and it covers the majority of the block. Surrounding zoning includes a mix of CMX districts, former Chapter 59 zones, and IAUO2 at Coors Field. So the current PUD was approved in 1993 while Coors Field was being constructed, and it allows for a future substation along Market Street, as well as mixed-use commercial and residential development across the remainder of the block. B8 land uses are allowed to promote active uses at the street level, and buildings are limited to 5 stories and 55 feet in height. The PUD contains additional requirements related to setbacks, parking and loading, landscaping, and buffering, as well as requirements that ensure access to the future substation during periods of construction and maintenance. As I said before, the site is currently vacant. Sometimes it is used for game day and special event parking, as well as for uses associated with those existing utilities and the future substation. We see a wide range of uses surrounding the site, including large amounts of surface parking, utilities, entertainment at Coors Field, multi-unit residential, office, commercial, retail, and mixed use. Taking a look at the surrounding context, you'll see the subject site in the top left and right photos, as well as Coors Field and the Barker substation building in the bottom photos. Surrounding buildings are generally 2 to 8 stories in height. Moving to the request, the PUD is based on CMX5 and adds an additional primary use, which is event space with alternate parking and loading. This use contains a number of limitations and requirements, as well as reporting requirements and design standards to ensure the space is inviting, activated, and oriented to the pedestrian realm. Additional standards regulate fence height, materials, opacity, openings, and spacing of columns to align and relate to Coors Field. Other improvements such as high-quality furniture, seating, and minimum bicycle parking are required. The PUD also continues to ensure access to and operation of the future substation through a required parking operations plan and relief from open space and public event limitations during periods of construction and maintenance. Lastly, the PUD requires a minimum of 26,000 square feet for the event space. This PUD has been in development since 2019, with the original information notice being sent in October of 2021. The applicant then continued working with CPD and Xcel and submitted a final application in December of last year. The property was properly noticed for the hearing today, and there is a City Council public hearing tentatively scheduled for March 13th. To date, staff has received 3 letters of support from nearby RNOs, including the Ballpark Collective, Downtown Denver Partnership, and Lodo District. Moving into the review criteria, there are 4 plans that impact the site. As stated in the staff report, this rezoning is consistent with several goals of the comp plan. Moving to Blueprint Denver, the future neighborhood context is mapped as downtown. This is the densest and most active of our contexts. While this PUD does use CMX as a base, There are prevalent CMX districts in the area, and they are intended to promote active and pedestrian skilled areas, which further the goals in Blueprint Denver and the overall intent of the context map. The Future Places map designates this as high residential area. The proposed rezoning is consistent with this plan direction, creating an inviting and active plaza space with distinctive elements that complement Coors Field and strengthen the pedestrian realm. This request is also consistent with the future street types, as Blake Street is a downtown arterial, which is surrounded by intense land uses and have a high focus on pedestrian and bike connectivity, while 21st Street is a local street planned to become a festival street and is a key spine of the 5280 trail. The growth area strategy marks this as high and high medium in a downtown context, where we anticipate 5% of employment growth and 15% of housing growth by 2040. This is also consistent as the PUD could allow for new housing and jobs after the no-build restriction is lifted in 2036. This is also consistent with additional strategies in Blueprint Denver, rezoning from former Chapter 59 PUD to a DZC PUD, and it is also consistent with Blueprint's direction on limiting the use of custom zoning. Next, we have the Northeast Downtown Neighborhoods Plan, which was adopted in 2011. Key recommendations in this plan include giving prominence to the pedestrian realm with the special attention paid to Blake Street. The land use concept is mixed use and the maximum building height is mapped at 8 stories. This requested PUD district based on CMX5 is consistent with this guidance, allowing a mix of uses, including the event space, with limitations and a maximum building height that is in line with the recommendations of the plan. Lastly, we look at the downtown area plan, which recommends entertainment-focused development in Ballpark with active uses along the street edge and pedestrian improvements to the nearby streets, especially 21st Street. The PUD is consistent with this vision, creating a vibrant and welcoming pedestrian realm, integrating with future improvements related to the 5280 trail, and limiting future development to the more pedestrian-oriented shopfront building form. Staff also finds this requested zoning meets the next 4 criteria. And then we also have 5 additional PUD criteria in the Denver Zoning Code. I've mentioned these at length in the staff report, but I'll summarize them briefly. First, the PUD is consistent with the intent of planned unit developments, as customization is necessary to address the special characteristics and development constraints of this site. Next, this PUD is not intended as a vehicle to develop the site inconsistent with the neighborhood context or the adopted plans, and it does provide significant public benefit with publicly accessible open space, required public events, and pedestrian-oriented site improvements. The PUD also complies with the standards and criteria in Division 9.6, as the necessary development is not feasible under a standard zone district and establishes just one additional use with site-specific limitations that is compatible with what surrounds the site today. Lastly, the PUD establishes permitted building forms that are compatible with the adjacent existing building forms by using tailored design standards to activate the site, enhance the 5280 trail concept, and allow parking to only occur on limited days while respecting the no-build restriction and the access easement. When vertical development can occur, the PUD only allows the shopfront building form, which contains the most stringent build-to and transparency requirements to ensure pedestrian-oriented design and active street-level uses. Based on all of those review criteria, CPD recommends approval and hopes that this body will move it forward. I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm joined by the applicant team in person.
Thank you so much. We have one speaker in the queue right now. President Torres, go ahead with your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Brandon. And I like your bow tie Tuesday. Good job. Question about some of the detail that you mentioned in the PUD in terms of when they would be allowed to switch to residential development. Can you repeat that part?
Yes, so the property was purchased from Excel in 2016 and has a 20-year no-build restriction, meaning that sometime after 2036, this could be redeveloped and would have the base CMX zoning, which would allow for office, residential, mixed uses.
So if they decide to build after 2036, does the PUD go away and the MX zoning is what would only apply?
We wrote it in such a way that the PUD would not go away and that they would be able to develop just under a CMX5 zone district.
Okay. And then you said if they do residential, then the shopfront would be the only building form that could be used there.
Yes, that's correct, and that has their most stringent build-to and transparency requirements.
Okay, got it. And that is, what's the floor activation requirement for that?
I would have to look into that. I know maybe I don't think that there's a ground floor activation requirement. It's a transparency and build to requirement though.
Okay. Okay, got it. Thank you. I think that's all the questions I have for right now.
Thank you. So one question I had on, I don't know what slide, maybe it's slide 22. It says enables street level active uses, including a public plaza, but it doesn't require it, correct? It's just like aspirational because MX or the underlying base zone district, you can do 100% residential in that zone district, correct?
Great catch, that's correct.
Who's representing the developer or the applicant?
Let's see, Greg Fiesel or maybe Sean?
I have a question for you, either Greg or whichever one. Hi, good morning.
Hi, Greg Fiesel, Colorado Rockies.
Thank you. So in your plan, I know you don't have a crystal ball and we can't predict 100% the future, but it seems like this would be a great spot to have some type of ground floor activation, say, when you were able to build so far out. Would that be something that you all would want to see, or would you want to have it fully residential? I just feel like when we have best practices in design realm are to have ground floor active use across the street, especially from a Rocky state, like a stadium. It creates that creates a vibe on a street where you'd want to cross the street and continue using the street instead of just having like a gym across the street. Can you tell us for right now, I see what your plans are, but do you have any plans like thinking down the road once you were able to build on the site?
We've talked about it, if I understand your question. They're scheduled to light up the substation this year or next year. So, what you would do on that site next to a substation, we would have to put some thought to. But we're very excited about having an additional 26,000 square feet of open space that the community and the neighborhood can use.
And then if somebody wanted to use the open space for a different type of gathering, would they contact the Rockies? Are
Yes.
you allowing that to not just have the Rockies be the operator of the open space? Are other people would be in the future if this were to go through?
Yeah, we would operate it just like we do Coors Field, our parking lot, McGregor Square, and the 50,000 square foot of open space where we would operate it. And people would call us and we would say, here's what we can do, here's a date that works, and try to work out the particulars.
And are there any, do you have anything baked in for nonprofits or any type of community serving?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a requirement in the PUD.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for being here with us today. I have no further questions. Yep. Seeing no other further questions in the queue, we have a motion by Councilman Cashman, a second by myself, to move this before the full city council, and we'll see you there. Thank you for your time today. Next up, I believe we have community planning and development again.
So good morning, Ludi. I am Libby Kaiser with CPD, and we are here to review a rezoning request for 6298 North Argonne Street. And this is located in Council District 11, represented by Councilmember Stacy Gilmore, and it's in the DIA neighborhood. The property is located southwest of 64th Avenue and Tower Road. It's approximately 6 acres and is currently vacant. The applicant is proposing to rezone to suburban mixed use, 3 stories, which would allow a variety of residential, civic, commercial, and industrial uses, and the general shopfront, drive-through services, drive-through restaurant building forms. The DIA Influence Area Overlay Zone, or AIO, would also apply to the rezoning, and that overlay prohibits single-unit and 2-unit dwellings, while multi-unit dwellings are not allowed north of 64th Avenue. The existing zoning, CMU 20 and CMU 30 with waivers and conditions, are districts from former Chapter 59. The waivers and conditions prohibit residential uses in both districts, as well as some commercial and industrial uses in CMU 30. However, the use overlay 1 allows adult businesses. Development intensity is limited by a floor area ratio of 1.0, and there is no maximum height. Adjacent zone districts are also former Chapter 59. Looking at the existing context, the subject property is vacant, while a 3-story hotel is located to the south, and a stormwater detention facility is located to the north. I switched that around. A stormwater detention facility is to the south. And then land to the east and north are also vacant. And throughout the rezoning process, application notifications have been provided according to code requirements, and City Council public hearing is scheduled for March 13th. To date, staff has received 0 public comments. Also, as part of the process, staff has worked with the applicant to outline a large development framework that specifies the steps required for development of this site, including rezoning, a development agreement, and approval of various site development applications. The development agreement, which is expected to be finalized prior to the City Council hearing, includes contributions of parkland payment, as well as payment in lieu of parkland and recreational amenities. In addition, the applicant has committed to an affordable housing plan that will provide 8% of dwelling units at 60% of area median income, which is in line with the expanding housing affordability requirements. Moving on to the Denver Zoning Code review criteria, it must be found that the requested map amendment is consistent with these 5 criteria. In regard to criteria 1, there are 3 adopted plans that apply to the requested rezoning, including Comp Plan 2040, Blueprint Denver, and the Far Northeast Area Plan. As stated in the staff report, the rezoning is consistent with several goals in the comp plan, particularly as they relate to providing more housing options and promoting development where infrastructure and services exist or are planned. Looking at Blueprint Denver, the plan defines the future neighborhood context as suburban. And since the proposed SMX3 district is within the suburban context and allows a mix of uses, the proposed rezoning is appropriate and consistent with the plan. The rezoning is also consistent with the future place types identified in Blueprint Denver. The residential high-medium future place type calls for multi-unit residential and neighborhood serving mixed-use buildings with heights up to 8 stories. The rezoning is also consistent with the future street types defined in Blueprint Denver, which classifies Argonne Street as a commercial collector. And commercial streets typically contain commercial uses, including shopping centers, auto services, and offices. And then 63rd and Ceylon Street are classified as local or undesignated streets, which are often characterized by residential uses. And since the proposed SMX3 AI zone district is consistent with these street types, it is appropriate for the plan and consistent with the plan. And then moving on to growth areas, the subject property is part of greenfield residential areas, which anticipate 0% of new jobs and 5% of new housing. And then it is also within the DIA influence area that prohibits some uses that would otherwise be allowed within the underlying zone district. The proposed SMX3 zone, combined with the airport influence overlay, is consistent with this growth strategy as it facilitates new multi-unit housing while prohibiting single unit and 2-unit dwellings that aren't compatible near the airport. Furthermore, the proposed rezoning helps implement the Blueprint Denver policy related to converting former Chapter 59 zone districts to the current Denver zoning code. Blueprint Denver also identifies 3 equity concepts to consider for planning and implementation, including improving access to opportunity, reducing vulnerability to displacement, and expanding housing and jobs diversity. This subject property is in an area with low to moderate access to opportunity, as it has low scores in the built environment related to access to parks and fresh food, and the percentage of child obesity is high while access to transit is poor. In response to the equity analysis and affirmed in the development agreement, the applicant will provide parks and open space, as well as a playground, shelter, park benches, and pedestrian connections that will help address access to opportunity in the area. The subject property is also in an area that has medium vulnerability to involuntary displacement. The area scored as vulnerable to displacement in median household income and educational attainment. And in areas with high vulnerability to involuntary displacement, it is important to increase affordable housing options so that residents of all income levels can continue to live in these neighborhoods. And the applicant's decision to opt into the city's affordable housing requirements will contribute to addressing this equity measure. The subject property is in an area that has moderate housing diversity. However, the area has a higher percentage of owners to renters and less diverse housing costs compared to the city as a whole. And affordable housing will also help this metric. The subject property and surrounding area have 86% innovation jobs based on its proximity to the airport, while it has 14% retail jobs and less than 1% manufacturing jobs. And the proposed rezoning is not anticipated to significantly impact this metric. Moving on to the Far Northeast Area Plan. This plan was adopted in 2019 after Blueprint Denver, and so it very closely mirrors the recommendations of Blueprint Denver. For example, the future neighborhood context is suburban. The future place type is high-medium residential, and the DIA influence area applies. And the growth strategy also follows Blueprint Denver and categorizes the property as greenfield residential areas. Finally, maximum building heights are 5 stories. So based on all the above, the proposed rezoning is consistent with the Far Northeast Area Plan. The rezoning is also consistent with criteria 2, 3, and 5 as stated in the staff report. In regard to criteria 4, the fact the property retained former Chapter 59 zoning after the city adopted the current 2010 code is the most applicable justifying circumstance for this rezoning. In addition, Blueprint Denver and the Far Northeast Area Plan were adopted after the existing zone district was in place, and these plans recommend more intense uses and better design outcomes than the current district. So the adoption of Blueprint Denver and the Far Northeast Area Plan are also justifying circumstances. In conclusion, CPD recommends approval of the rezoning request, and the applicant is here to address any questions.
Thank you so much, Libby. Do we have any questions or comments from my colleagues? Seeing none, we have a motion by Councilman Torres to move this to the full council. We have a second by Councilman Clark. Seeing no objections from anyone at council, we'll see you at City Council in a few weeks. Thank you, Libby.
Thank you.
There's some consent items. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Luke and myself. Seeing no other further business before this committee, we stand adjourned. Have a good day.
Taught me. And any little mistake I made was, just massacred by the media. We had 2 competing newspapers, and at one time I felt like I was a piñata being banged back and forth. Now, we demonstrated that we could lead, and we were reelected. So when people tell me, are there people in Denver who are a bit racist? Sure, but they're not the majority, because we keep electing people of color. But it was challenging, it was hard, but at the end of the day, I had a great team. And most importantly, we had the people of Denver who came together, who were willing to serve on committees and to volunteer their time, to bring Major League Baseball, to work on neighborhood issues, to fight pollution, to clean up our neighborhoods, which were deteriorating. All the issues we were dealing with back then, we had a lot of input from the people of Denver, and that's what made us successful. There are challenges today that cannot be solved by one mayor or one governor, only by citizens participating and being part of the solution. So that's my message to the young people. When you look around the city today and you love, the train station and the development of the Central Platte Valley and historic Denver and all that, and the lower downtown, that just didn't magically occur. It took hard work and years of struggle to get those things done. And you've got to do the same thing today so that future generations can look back and say, oh, those people in 2021 found a way to deal with homelessness or made our neighborhood strong again. So developing a great city is a continuing effort. People around the country are fascinated about Denver International Airport, and we figured out a way to solve this really important transportation issue, not just for Colorado, but for the nation. And that's why people around the country and around the world come and look at DIA, because it really is a world-class airport. And it's improved our economy, it's made the national transportation system more efficient, and we've demonstrated that you can build airports for the future. But they're very hard to do. And that's why nobody else has done one. The road to the airport, I call it the airport road. Everybody else calls it Pena Boulevard, and my kids think it's pretty cool. But yes, it's a great honor to have that named after me. It was done after I left office, and I very much appreciate it. I go back and think about our team, and I think about the people of Denver and Adams County who supported that airport. But I always tell people, it was a team effort, it was a community effort, and that's what makes us different from a lot of places in the United States, and frankly, around the world. Before I became mayor, we had a minor league baseball team, and there was a billionaire, Marvin Davis, who was trying to get a Major League Baseball team. And I ran for mayor. I said, look, I like Marvin Davis, great man, but it's got to be a city effort. We created the Denver Baseball Commission, and they went to work. We started lobbying Major League Baseball in New York. We started hosting games here with old-timers and teams from other countries, and for 8 years, we kept lobbying Major League Baseball to provide us with a team. We kept giving them data showing this was a sports community. And so eventually, a couple of people who were Denver citizens went to the legislature and passed a bill saying, all right, we'll create a baseball district, we'll pass a tax to create a baseball-only stadium, but we will not raise a penny of that tax until you give us a team. Lower Downtown had just become a historic district. So finally, a few days after I left office, in July of 1991, I guess it was, they announced that we were going to get the Rockies. And then